All right, welcome back. We need to cover part 2 of chapter 10, which is all about carrier/WAN technology. So carrier and WAN interchangeable terms. Other than carrier refers to the organization that's providing WAN connectivity to you. So I guess there's some subtle difference there. Well, let's get started right away. If you provision a circuit from a carrier, this would be, remember on the whiteboard I drew up private circuit versus a public circuit. This would be more on the private circuit from an old-fashioned telco or telephone company. You're asking to provision a leased line. So the leased line is from point A to point B, the whole thing. Remember, there's also a difference between access lines and trunk lines. So here in the diagram, these backbone lines are trunk lines that connect, for example, if this is AT&T's network, that can connect their network equipment to each other. Trunk ends on the back end, and access lines are how your organization accesses the carrier. I also noted in class that, just FYI, remember your phone company is going to charge you 3 times. They're going to charge you for the leased line, they're going to charge you for this access line, and they're going to charge you for this access line. So it's entirely possible to get 3 different phone bills for this, which is a little weird, but there you go. And just make sure you're using this language. You're requesting the telco to provision a leased line for you. You're not ordering a WAN, or worse, a WAN. Nobody says that. Now, we already said in class that WAN speeds are typically a lot slower than LAN speeds. And so I don't want you to get all snobby when you see some of these speeds we're talking about on the WAN side. Probably the lowest common denominator is the T1 line, which is, I know these days sounds like a joke, 1.5 megabits per second. 1.5 megabits per second is a good number to know, only because it's so universal. Sure, there are faster speeds, and certainly within the U.S. you're going to get a better circuit than this. But depending on if you go internationally or even in rural USA, a T1 line might be the best that you can get. Now, FYI, in Europe they have a slightly different standard called an E1 line that has a few extra channels, so you can actually get 2 megabits per second speed. Other better speeds are with OC3, OC12, OC48, which sound like 2 gig here, 600 megabits per second. These sound like kind of better speeds, or 150 megabits per second. It sounds more like what you're used to with a good old cable modem in your apartment complex. The problem is pricing. Now the difference is it's not just speed, it's quality and uptime and service wrapped around the circuit. So to give you an idea of differences in pricing, I looked some of these up a couple of months ago. DSL, T1 line is going to be, we call it $1,000 a month. T3, call it $3,000 a month or more, depending on where in the U.S. you are. But notice for an OC48, to get that OC48 2 gigabits per second, $52,000 a month. That's a big number, right? So now you understand why, in addition to the private side, I showed you the public side using the internet, and that's the business case for why we're willing to put up with less security of the internet, because $52,000 a month is a lot. There is a new standard called Metro Ethernet, Metropolitan Ethernet. I heard one guy at a conference just call this Ethernet, sometimes carrier Ethernet, but you need to specify this is Metro Ethernet because we're talking about the WAN side of things. So 20 megabits of throughput on the WAN side is hellaciously fast. That's great, and for $120, that's dirt cheap for business. The other cool thing about Ethernet is it's implemented very similarly to how Ethernet on the LAN is. So Ethernet, the world's most popular layer 2 protocol for LANs, there's a corresponding layer 2 protocol on the WAN side called Metro Ethernet. The problem with this is it's not available everywhere. It is not universally available. Same thing with Google Fiber. Google makes a very compelling business case. And actually until recently, I was a big fan of Google Fiber. I mean, $70 a month for a gigabit per second. Are you kidding me? The problem is, I think when Google went into, is it Louisville, Kentucky, where they just, the business didn't work out, and so they abandoned ship. They dug their fiber like an inch into the pavement, and it started coming out of the side of the road where they had buried it, and since it wouldn't stay down, instead of burying it the way they're supposed to, they just left it and left town and said, oh well, this was a failed implementation, see you later. I think that says that's not what you want to do in your business, just kind of lose so many customers that way. And DSL, I don't know if any of you or your family members have a DSL connection. While it is slow, it is a great example of a dedicated circuit. So it's really implemented just like it is a leased line from the telephone company. It's a dedicated circuit that they own, soup to nuts. I do think it's helpful, even though I like to focus on the business side of things. It's interesting to start off with some residential technology that you may be more familiar with. DSL has some, and I don't know why this has, here, let's just get rid of that. I don't know why that's there. DSL has some interesting features. I mean, ultimately, it's super slow. As we see on the next slide, initially it was 1.5 meg. Notice that that's the same number as T1 line. Now DSL is offering up to 12 megabits per second, which is not bad. It's still hard to compete with a Charter cable modem at $60-70 a month, even $100 a month. Still blows them away. There are a couple of issues. One is you don't have to install anything new. I mean, the phone company like Charter would have to pull cable into your neighborhood, and if you're out in the country, they're not going to do it. But as long as your house has an existing phone line, you can get DSL because it uses the existing telephone wiring that comes into your home, which is cool. And then the other thing that is an advantage of DSL over a cable modem is the speed symmetry. So by speed symmetry, remember assignment number 1, you did a speed test, and you measured your download speed and your upload speed. Which one was better? That's right, your download speed was a lot bigger, and your upload speed was like a trickle. Well, with DSL, it's completely symmetric, so the speeds you get upload and download are the same, which makes more sense for business. If you've got two sites that you want to connect, you don't want one side to be slower than the other. You want it to be symmetrical. And then notice this quality of service SLA. So the phone company can offer you a much better service level agreement because they control all of the equipment, so they can commit to uptime, where an internet ISP cannot do that effectively. This is the first of many maps that I like to show in this chapter, just to give you a sense of how things are unevenly distributed through the U.S. So here we see DSL coverage. If you're on the East Coast, it's fairly widely available. Midwest is okay, but the further you go out west, not nearly as dense until you get out to the West Coast. So DSL coverage, even though you've got the existing phone line, the central office that you're connecting to needs to be able to support DSL, so that's why it's not available everywhere. But compare DSL coverage with T1 coverage. Remember that measly 1.5 megabits per second. Here's T1 coverage. Boom. This is why T1 is still popular, because it's just more widely available. Now on the phone company side of things, I mean, on your end, all you need is a DSL modem on your side, but the phone company needs to provision something called a DSLAM, which is fun to say, a DSL access multiplexer. So remember, a multiplexer just supports multiple conversations over a shared circuit. So notice this DSLAM will send data out to the internet and phone calls out to the public switch telephone network. So it's just merging and then unmerging and splitting out traffic appropriately. And you've probably seen a DSLAM already. You just didn't know what you were looking at. on the side of the road, these kind of boxes, these will be locked up. Unlike a NID outside your apartment complex, a DSLAM will definitely be locked up. This is what this box from the phone company looks like. And allow me to reinforce that PSTN stands for Public Switch Telephone Network. POTS stands for Plain Old Telephone Service. Yes, that's an acronym that we actually use. Now, switching from phone companies to cable companies, prior to 1996 or so, before deregulation, there was a very clear distinction between a cable company and a phone company. Now it's harder to tell just because you can get a voice over IP phone from Charter and so forth. So they're acting like a telco, but they're still not really a telco. Cable modems are much more popular in the U.S. than in other countries. If you try to get a cable modem in Europe, they're just not nearly as frequent, or Asia, any other part of the world. Part of the popularity of cable modems is that this awful coax cable has been pulled to most neighborhoods, in fact most households in the U.S. The reason coax cable has been pulled everywhere is because of HBO. So stay with me. Back in this would be late 70s is when cable comes out and it's not popular. Early 80s, HBO starts broadcasting along with ESPN and allows people to watch R-rated movies in the privacy of their own home, and the popularity of cable television explodes. So we pull coax everywhere, and then in the 90s they discovered, hey, we're sending TV signal, we can send other kinds of signal over coax, like data signal. So we can get in on this internet thing. So in the 90s, late 90s, cable modems started getting really popular, but this is really a U.S. phenomenon. Okay, cable modems are way different from DSL. Remember, DSL is a dedicated circuit. Cable modems are not. They're absolutely shared. So please notice in this diagram from your home, shared throughput, all the homes in a neighborhood are sharing signal. Notice the splitter here that sends it back to the cable head end, that terminology I used in class. So the phone company has a central office, the cable company has a head end, and then connects to the cloud of the internet like that. But what this means effectively is if somebody else in your neighborhood is hogging traffic, downloading videos 24/7 from China or wherever, are you going to be impacted with your actual throughput? Yes. Yes, you are. So there are big differences between DSL and cable modem, and number one, you might not even have a choice between the two. If you live out in central Illinois somewhere, you might have to just take whatever's available to you. Same thing for businesses. Might have to take whatever's available where they are. I want you guys to understand the difference in architecture. So your DSL speed is primarily based on your distance to the central office. Cable modems are not limited by distance because they can keep repeating the signal. But the problem is cable modems are a shared medium. DSL lines are dedicated and they can give you much better SLA. Speaking of SLAs, service level agreements, this is the difference between residential and business class telecommunications. Residential technology is not appropriate for business. I know it's dirt cheap, but business people should not be ordering residential class WAN circuits for their businesses. Your provider has no way of guaranteeing uptime, and you owe it to your business to have a good SLA for the service, because I don't see how you're going to stay in business without it. Let's see. So far we've been talking about WANs in terms of a wired circuit that's provisioned for you. But of course there are plenty of examples of wireless WAN technology, cell phones being the most popular version, although there are others, microwave and satellite. These are all WAN, wireless versions of WAN circuits. But let's focus on cell phones for our purposes. You're already familiar with how cell phones work in terms of the handoff from tower to tower as you move along. There's a misconception, though, that wireless technology means that companies that produce cabling, either twisted pair or fiber optic cabling, are going to go out of business. nothing could be further from the truth, because the more cell phone towers go up, the more wiring is necessary, because all of these towers are wired back to the MTSO, the Mobile Telephone Switching Office. Let me say again, MTSO, Mobile Telephone Switching Office, kind of serves the same purpose as the phone company's central office or the cable company's head end, just a concrete bunker with racks and racks of network gear in it, with a connection to the public switch telephone network. So even though you're wireless here, while sometimes these towers are talking to each other, typically there's a cable that runs back to the MTSO. So lots of cabling still needed by cell phone companies. When we talk about cell phone telecom technology, when we refer to generations, generation is probably an okay label because it's really a marketing term, but these are protocols. There is a standard that 3G has to adhere to. There is a standard that 4G is supposed to adhere to. AT&T being widely known for not sticking to any standard. They advertised 4G before it was even available, and Verizon similarly got in trouble calling their offering 4G before it was really 4G. That's where this whole LTE nomenclature came from. But 4G is IP-only transmission. 3G is a completely different protocol for data transmission. But 4G is 100% IP, as in the same TCP/IP we're talking about in class? Yes, same IP. 5G, I don't want you to think of this as being faster than 4G. It might be, but really the advantage of 5G is going to be density, that a single cell tower is going to be able to support 10 times as many devices on that tower. So not 10 times faster, 10 times as many devices. Well, what are those 10 times as many devices? IoT devices. IoT devices, and the other application for 5G is autonomous driving. So this is infrastructure that we have to lay in order to get ready for this. The problem with 5G towers is they have to, I found a map one time that showed this, but the cell phone towers have to be like 5 times closer together. So we're actually going to have to build a lot of 5G towers, probably in people's backyards. They're not going to like it. This is not going to be popular in order to support the kind of connectivity that secure connectivity that IoT devices are going to demand in the future. I mentioned LTE coverage. I did find a map today from the FCC that publishes information on this stuff. Just notice that the mayonnaise is not smeared evenly over the U.S. There are some areas of the U.S. that are denser than others in terms of coverage, and some that have complete gaps. It's not the same everywhere. And this social idea that things are not the same everywhere, things are not equal, things are not fair, is called the digital divide. There are different examples of the digital divide. Socially, we're talking about the haves and have-nots in society. Digital divide is a bad thing in my book, socially, because if you have broadband, that means you get better access to online services from the government, you get better access to health care, you get better access to education, certainly better access to conveniences like retail shopping. Whereas if you live in an area that does not have broadband, is it right that you shouldn't get all those services? Well, a lot of people would argue no, and that's why internet access, arguably broadband internet access, should be a right of all citizens and not just dependent on geography. But that's a political discussion, and this is not a political class. All I can do is show you the way the world is. There's a big difference in the U.S. Just look at, I mean, this is an older map, but where cable companies are located, where they have a presence. Notice all these gaps out here. Now I realize Charter has bought out Cox and Cablevision and a couple of others. The map has changed, but the principle is the same. It's not spread out evenly at all. But let's zoom out a little bit. Let's zoom out and look at the whole world. This is just the number of broadband internet subscribers. This was back in 2011, although the problem is it's not like you can get 2019, 2018, 2017 data easily. A lot of this is based on census data, so it's always going to be many years old. So 2011 data that was reported in 2013. But the story hasn't changed that much going up to 2019. Obviously, the U.S. is doing well in terms of number of people that have access to broadband. Notice in South America there are issues, Central America there are issues, all over Africa there are issues, as well as the Middle East and parts of Asia. But that's just having access. So having access is one thing. Being able to afford access is another thing, because it does not cost the same everywhere you go in the world. So it's important to see, let's see, cost of 1 month of broadband subscription. So light yellow here is cheaper, and the darker the color, the more expensive it is. So notice that it's more expensive in parts of Europe. In fact, more expensive in Germany, which is a little odd to me. More expensive in certainly parts of Africa and the Middle East. Is it right? Is it fair? Is it just? No. It's just the way it is. But my favorite map just shows you where electricity is. So, not to be dumb or anything, but you can't have a good computer information system if you don't have electricity. It's better if we dim the lights in class and look at this picture, but just pause to look. These are actually devices that are responding to pings, and so they have a little light that shows everything with an IP address around the world. Just again, notice how it is not spread evenly around the world. The world is a crazy, wonderful place. Look at the eastern seaboard, very dense. Western Europe, very dense. Now, a lot of this is dark just due to geography, rainforest or desert and such, but still, that's not, most of the world. In fact, I would go so far as to say most of the world does not have broadband internet access, and it's important to know that because you're probably going to work for a multinational company at some point in your career that has locations around the world, and you need to be able to communicate to management, hey, just because I can get a 100 megabit pipe in St. Louis doesn't mean I can get that other places in the world. You might have to deal with a 1 meg pipe or worse, depending on where you are in the world.